So now it's time to talk about lighting here in Cinema 4D. Now what I'm going to do is come over here and I'm going to grab a floor object, and then I want to come over here and grab a figure object. Now I'm going to middle mouse click here and just sort of get this guy so that he's sitting on top of the floor. Right there. Let's zoom in a little bit. Make sure we have our guy where we want him. And I think that's going to be about it. We can zoom out here and sort of get him framed up. There we go. Okay, let's go ahead and render this view. And what you'll notice when we render here is that we can see everything in the scene. So we can see the guy, we can see the floor, although we have no lights in the scene. So in the object manager, we have no lights. And that's because Cinema 4D is using what's called the default light. Now the default light is on up until the point where you actually put a light in the scene. So now if I come over here to the lights, I drop a light in the scene. If I render now, the default light is no longer being used. Only the light that we have dropped into the scene is being used. Okay? So if I delete that, render again, we're back to the default lighting. Okay, so let's go ahead and drop a light back in the scene. And I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to go into a four-way view by middle mouse clicking, and I'm just going to put this in front of our guy. And now we can kind of see what we have here. We go to each view. Let's go back into the perspective view. Let's start taking a look at some of our parameters for our lights. So if we just render now, we've got our guy. He's on the floor. Let's go over here to the light and take a look at some of our attributes in the attribute manager. So if we want to turn the light on and off, we can do that right here with enable. So if we render now, we don't have the light being cast. Turn that back on. And you can see that we're getting all this dark around here, and that's because that we're using the light. We have the coordinates, which typically you're going to drag your light around in the scene. But if you wanted to put it in a specific place, you could put the coordinates here. Let's go to the General tab. This is where most of the things are really happening. So we can control the color of our light. So let's say that we wanted to have more of a blue tint to our light. We could come over here and change that. Click OK. If we render now, you can see that we're getting blue cast. We can control the intensity of the light. So it defaults to 100%. We could take this down, and we get something like this. And typically you're going to want to adjust this because you'll have more than one light in the scene, and you don't want all the lights sitting at 100% normally. So that's the reason you have the ability to change these. Now we can also take this over 100%. So if we wanted to have something like 300%, you can see that we're starting to blow this guy out because we've got so much intensity in the light here. All right, take that back to 100%. Now, currently we're using an OmniLight. You have multiple lights that you can choose from, but we're using OmniLight right now, and that sort of acts like a light bulb, so it casts light in all directions from the light source, which is right here. We'll talk about some of these others in a minute. Next, we come to shadows. By default, shadows are off. We have several different shadow types, so let's just turn on Shadow Map Soft and go ahead and do a render now. And you can see that it is throwing the shadow from this light, which is located right here. Now, Shadow Map Soft, these are the fastest to render, but the least accurate shadow maps that are available to you here in Cinema 4D. We also have Ray Traced Hard, which sort of simulates light or the sun. So if we render that, you can see this is a much rougher looking, like the sun was right above him, kind of a shadow. And then we also have Area Shadows, which are the most accurate, but take the most amount of time to render. Now in this particular case, we have the light way too close to the subject, and we'd need to increase some of the other parameters to make this look right. But typically, if you want very accurate shadows, area shadows is what you want to deal with. And we'll go into that again in a later chapter. Okay, back over to our light. Next, we have visible light. Now right now it's set to none so that you can't see any light. We can have visible light. And now you can see how that works. Volumetric light. This is light that has volume to it. So a visible light does not affect objects that lie in its cone of light. The light rays penetrate objects unhindered, casting no shadow in the visible light's beam. In order for shadows to be cast by visible light, you've got to use the volumetric lighting. So I guess the best way to do this is just show you what I'm talking about. So let me take this light and I'm going to turn it into a spotlight. And I'm going to go in here, set the active object as the camera. So basically, I'm looking through the light now. And I want to get the light set up so that it's right on this guy. And make this bigger so it's getting him completely. And maybe turn this up very high so that it's very obvious what I'm doing. Next thing I want to do is come back and go back to the default camera. Let's just pull this out. This light is affecting him. And let's just even pull this out further. Let's just pull that out a little bit more. Okay, that should do it. So right now, if we have visible light selected and we click on render, we can see that it's hitting him, but it's really having no effect on the actual object, the figure object. We change this to volumetric and click render. We can see that we have these shadows that are being cast from the object, from the man. So the volumetric actually casts shadows. It's actually hitting the object and casting shadows, where visible light is just really a light source that's being thrown in one direction here in this case, but it actually doesn't cast any shadows on the object here in the volume of the light. Okay, so that is some of the basics of lighting here in Cinema 4D.